Maito!
What exactly are you?
Your mother. She's awaiting your rescue.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Backlot Banter. This is the review channel on YouTube where we talk about all the latest and hot movies for your viewing pleasure. I'm Tanner Dykstra. I'm joined not as always, by a familiar face on this channel, Abram Buhner, and Abram, you are my, you know what, I'm going to come up with a superlative just like Tucker does.
Right.
You are my generationally traumatized co-host.
Sure.
Because we are today, of course, talking about the latest Studio Ghibli, however you want to say it, film, The Boy and the Heron, alternatively titled How Do You Live, but it has just gotten its wide release here in the United States, so we both viewed it. I viewed it twice, actually, in subtitled and dubbed versions, but we're here to talk about it. And before we get into that, Abram, you know what I'd like the dear viewers to do?
What?
I'd like them to subscribe to Backlot Banter. I'd like them to like this video and comment their thoughts on this film down below. And if they would be so kind, I'd like them to join our Discord server. That link is in the description. There you can talk about movies, you can talk about video games, you can talk about music, you can talk about your daily life, no matter how exciting or boring it might be.
Yeah, you can talk with us about this movie, the #1 movie in America.
Exactly. Abram, that is very interesting. And potentially we can talk about that a bit at the end,
Sure.
but I think we should get into the nitty-gritty of talking about The Boy and the Heron.
Yeah.
And Abram, you've been a tight-lipped McGillicuddy over there. I have not seen you post your score on Letterboxd, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on The Boy and the Heron.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to talk with you about this film because I really, really enjoyed it. But I feel like I didn't, at least in my one viewing, really wrap my head around the messaging of the film. And I think that's ultimately what I'd really like to dive into, because I'm not a enormous Ghibli fan. I've seen a handful of films. I think this is my 6th. And I would probably rank it as maybe my 2nd favorite behind Howl's Moving Castle. But it's important to note that I'm not crazy about these films overall. I mean, I would put Howl's Moving Castle a 4 to 5 star, and I think I would probably put Boy and the Heron in a similar place.
Realm, yeah.
Because I think that The Boy and the Heron really captivated me on a plot and visual level, the way that I think the sort of odyssey of Howl's Moving Castle did. I mean, the realms we move through, the characters we meet, the score, the experience of this film, I think, is just essential. But I find myself maybe getting a little bit lost in what it all means. And I think that's where I want to drill in, because to me, that's the difference between me thinking this is a really good movie and a really great one.
Sure, yeah. I can understand where a lot of that, apprehension about this film can come from, and I certainly have my read on it. But I think to start out on a more a lower level of criticism and review here, I think we can talk about just the beauty of this film, and how it does move through these dreamlike worlds, and on the whole operates as sort of like a dreamlike experience from Hayao Miyazaki, who, as much as he wouldn't admit it, is a creator who makes a lot of films and stories that represent him and himself, and I think we can get into that in due time. But this story, Abram, this story is the story of Maito.
Yeah.
And he is a young boy growing up in 1940s Japan, and him and his father leave Tokyo after his mother dies in a hospital fire. A beautifully rendered scene, I might add, that opens up this film. That is so interestingly told with visual stylings. Yeah. It's very much a departure from a lot of what I remember and a lot of what I've seen from Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki. In that it's done with this sort of like smeary, very I don't know, leaving trace lines sort of hand-drawn animation that really adds to the chaos and out-of-body experience that Maito is experiencing in that moment to open up that scene.
Yeah, this film is very I would say chaotic. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean that just the frames are so busy, and I feel like the pace is elevated, particularly when you look at earlier Ghibli work. I mean, I've watched a number for the first time this year, had a lot of first-time watches, watching things like Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service, which are fan favorites, I just find to be, in some ways, quite sleepy, which is obviously intentional. That's part of the sort of Ghibli as an aesthetic, which has, I think, sort of reductively come to define a lot of this body of work.
Yes, the Max channel that you can put on the background. Just the imagery that we've come to know from that.
And I think that is deserved, especially when you look at something like Totoro that is so concerned with ambiance and everything, for better and worse, I think. But watching Boy and the Heron, there's like a frantic sense to the emotional charges of the characters that I think plays out in the visuals in, as you're saying, a technically different way, I think, for Ghibli, but also in a sort of viscerally different way as well. I found myself really enraptured in the movement of scenes and characters and action and colors and just these sort of kinetic motions in the frame in a way that I don't feel like I'm often pulled in by this studio's work.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And Abram, I kind of feel the same way about some of those titles that you had mentioned, like Kiki's Delivery Service and My Neighbor Totoro, that are the more, how should I say, easily accessible and maybe like, not to be mean or reductive, but like baby's first Studio Ghibli films.
Sure.
They're very accessible. They're very light and fluffy in terms of plot and theme. And are much more concerned, I feel, with the aesthetic that Studio Ghibli has come to be known for. But I think what Boy and the Heron is doing is providing something a bit more, certainly more late in the cycle for Hayao Miyazaki creatively, and a bit more representative and a bit more allegorical. And I think that allegory, if we want to get into that, or if we want to talk about some more base level stuff first, is quite complex and multifaceted. So Abram, I guess we're at a crossroads here. Would you like to continue talking about some base level stuff there, or would you just like to dive right into what does it all mean?
Yeah, here's my feeling. I think we should just dive in. I don't think that either of us are going to not recommend this film, right? So
no, absolutely
if you've stumbled across this review, you haven't seen it yet, you're on the fence, go watch The Boy and the Heron. And now we'll get into what it means. And I also think this is a film that really does invite multiple viewings, and I think part of the interesting dimension of the film is trying to get into it with others and parcel it out. So I think that this is really critical to getting further into the text. And I will note, by the way, I've only seen it once, and I thought I was seeing it dubbed. Now, I don't know if I made a mistake or if the theater made a mistake, but I saw the movie subbed. Now, that's what I actually wanted, so I'm happy about that.
Hey.
But I don't know. I would love to see it dubbed, if only because I have a crush on Robert Pattinson and Florence Pugh, but...
Yes.
On my first...
and they're both good.
Yeah. On my first viewing, I think what's so interesting as we get into like the allegory of it is that because the film is so busy on like a plot level, I feel like I need to revisit it to get deeper in. Because I was reflecting as I was decorating the Christmas tree today. What the fuck happened in Boy and the Heron, right? Because on a sort of plot level, it's frankly not that complicated. We go into what you could maybe interpret as the underworld, an afterlife, some realm of creation. Death and creation, interestingly, both sort of inhabit the same lower space. We physically drop through the ground to reach here.
When Maito is asked where he's from or where he's going, he's like up there. Yeah. He's like, and we look up at the sky as he gestures. So yeah, it is sort of this. I would presume, I'm not exactly well studied in this area, but some sort of representation or depiction of the Japanese conception of the afterlife, or this in-between plane of life and death, where yes, we have these deceased souls who we see who cannot kill, so they are being fed by Kiriko, who every time I mention something, I feel like I need to be like, so she's there because in this and that,
right?
Because Abram, you're right. what does happen in The Boy and the Heron?
Right.
He gets dropped down into this place about 50 minutes into the film, and he is there to rescue partially his mother, but also partially his aunt, who has gone missing and who he believes has been like lured or trapped there by the heron, the titular heron. And then he goes on this whole adventure where he is then confronted by the Tower Master, who is his great grand uncle.
Yeah.
And that, I feel, is where the real allegorical meat and sort of the stuff that like critics and theorizers like us sick and twisted individuals like to really chew on and get the gristles in our teeth and everything. Because, as I mentioned, Hayao Miyazaki, a man who 10 years ago released a film called The Wind Rises that is very transparently about him and his life.
Yeah, which I haven't seen.
Which follows basically to a T, like his upbringing I guess it doesn't follow his upbringing. It follows his interest in aviation and planes and sort of mirroring how he feels about filmmaking.
Yeah.
This is quite similar, where Maito, his father, just like Miyazaki's father, owns and operates a factory for creating airplane parts, and that is where I feel the connection between Maito and Miyazaki ends, because I feel, and I was talking about this with my girlfriend Anna after I'd seen it the second time today, I think there are elements of Miyazaki sprinkled across the three human male characters in this film.
Okay.
Maito, his father Soichi, and the Tower Master, his great grand uncle. I don't know if we did get his name. I don't remember it. I'm sorry.
I don't think we do.
But so there is that element of Miyazaki's childhood in Maito, obviously, and then I feel that there is the overbearing, overworked father figure in Soichi for sure, and then obviously in this conversation about building the little tower out of the little bricks, I think we get late stage Miyazaki talking to, as many people have observed, sort of a representation of his son Goro Miyazaki, who has tried his hand to be nice at directing a couple Studio Ghibli features, to little or mixed acclaim.
I think it's interesting, right? Because as you were saying a couple minutes ago, Tanner, you can read this below place, as I'll just call it, as sort of spiritually allegorical for the sort of Japanese notions of death and rebirth or whatever, which again, frankly, I don't have any basis in. So the way I read the film was closer to the way that you were just describing, in that it feels really like a meditation on almost like a responsibility inherent to creation in some way.
Okay.
Because there's this relationship between the above place and the below place that becomes clearer and clearer as the film progresses, in that we can pass in and out of it. But this place that we spend the second half of the film in, for the most part, below, is a lot more creative and a lot more alive and imaginative than where Mahito actually lives. And we even see that when the creations enter this quote-unquote real world, they are disfigured and they're more normal. The parakeets, for instance.
Yes, exactly. They become just normal parakeets.
Yeah, and I love the parakeets. It speaks to a dimension of the film that I really appreciated, which is this constant sense of movement and intrigue and characters and factions and peculiar ideas and visual gags of the parakeets marching Mahito up to the table where they want to serve him, and they're all holding plates, so they got like butcher knives behind their back. It's all really great, but I think that there's something really important in the fact that when they leave, they become different, and there's a lot of preoccupation with all the characters in the relationship to the great grand uncle and the ability to sort of take up his mantle when he goes. That's what the big I forget his actual name, but the big king parakeet. I
think he's just called the parakeet king, essentially.
He feels entitled to that role the way that he feels entitled to the role, and is not pleased about the fact that the great-granduncle wants to give it to Mahito instead.
Yeah.
And this is where I think I'm still trying to puzzle out what the film is really trying to tell us about this connection between the worlds, this sense of responsibility, this sort of sense of desire to be in the place of the great-granduncle, and the crumbling of the tower and the building of a new one. I think this is where I kind of end up getting a little bit lost in the whole picture.
Okay. Would you like to hear me sort of espouse what I believe about that?
I'm going to buckle in and listen now. Take me there.
I don't think it's anything too deep.
Sure.
My reading of it, anyway. In that the tower, to me, and the world that it sort of controls and represents, is just Studio Ghibli as a thing and as a creative force that Hayao Miyazaki basically built with his own two hands, with the help of plenty of people and animators and so on and so forth. But you think Ghibli, you think Hayao Miyazaki.
Yeah.
And he's aware of that. He's 80-some years
82,
old now.
I believe.
82. He's built this thing with his hands. It has become, purchased by the Walt Disney Corporation, the biggest media conglomerate in the world, and it is known and regarded for its high quality. And past that, it's become known for its creative fervor, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And Miyazaki realizes that he doesn't have that many years left. This is his third time announcing that this is his last film. And this his second time making a film that is basically like a creative magnum opus. And then we turn to Goro, who I feel is represented by Maito in that moment, where I think that what Miyazaki is saying with that great-granduncle character, he is like, that is who I am. I have aged out of this role. I can only keep it together for so much longer. I want to pass it on to a member of my bloodline. But I think in writing that moment, he realized that I want to do that, but it's also potentially unfair of me to expect that of my son.
Yeah.
Or to expect him even to want to do that, or to want to do it in the exact same way that I have been doing it for the past 5 decades. Or not 5 decades, like 40 years or something like that. A long time. And I think that's what it is that, and to bring it to fold in the parakeets that we all love so much. Yeah. The parakeets, to me, I think are they are like a hive-minded, they're even sort of maybe like fascist coded. Yeah. I noticed in one of the scenes, like right before we ascend the tower, there's a crowd of them and they're holding up signs that have like, I think German written on them. It's the word DUCH.
Yeah.
I don't know what language that is in. It looks German. They also have they have like a almost, I might be going like off the deep end here, but almost like an iron eagle, like Nazi symbol kind of thing on those signs. So I was like, what is Miyazaki saying here? I think they're like a corporate entity is essentially what they're supposed to represent. And that the corporate powers that be, that obviously have a staked interest in Studio Ghibli as a creative force, and see that Hayao Miyazaki is 82 years old, know that he's moving on. He's like, Miyazaki, just turn it over to us. We can control it. We can fix it. We can have it. We can maintain it.
Yeah.
And then the Parakeet King at the end, essentially being like, it can't be that hard. And he just slaps it together real quick, and it all falls apart. And he cuts it with his sword, and it just goes to shit.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair and interesting reading, and I think you can then connect that to, if we're talking about the two potential inheritors, you have the family or you have this corporate structure. I don't think you have to really wonder too hard which one decided to do a collaboration with Star Wars for a short, for instance.
Yes.
But the notion then that the parakeets want to eat the stand-in for Goro begins to make a little bit more sense, in addition to just allowing for some really great plot-level moments of beating them over the head with various things. And
that's maybe why I wanted to talk about the base-level stuff first, because it is so fun in that moment. Like, once we hit the parakeet section, they're just like, pun intended, bird-brained goons who are just like holding butcher's knives, and they have little chef's hats on as they're like cooking up in a big stew or something. I was like, this is silly fun, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, there's a lot of... It's interesting, right? Because when we're in the more regular world, there's the early meeting between the boy and the Heron.
Yes.
And we've got the Heron saying, "I can lead you to your mother," and the frogs that begin to cover Mahito. There's this amazing imagery, but but that is in some ways a little bit more muted in that we're just like a bunch of just like fucking frogs. But then we go below, and the images of the pelican swarming his body as they're trying to get through the gate, the colorful parakeets in their own sense of culture and rules or whatever. One thing that I really enjoy about Spirited Away, and if you can believe I'm praising the film Spirited Away,
incredible stuff,
is this notion that we really step into a world that has its own understanding of logic and its own understanding of culture, and these completely peculiar beings just sort of exist and have a rationale, and they have a job and a purpose. What's the name of it? Kiriko? Kiriko, thank you.
The old lady who then is like the younger version of herself,
I think it's so interesting when Mahito is being swarmed by the pelicans, Kiriko on her boat goes, "Oh shit, someone's trying to open the gate." She understands what's happening. That's a quality to the sort of down the rabbit hole nature of my favorite Ghibli films I think is really well illustrated here. Having the fire wand, getting the pelicans away, taking Mahito back, the Wara Wara showing up, the relationship between the Wara Wara and the pelicans, and then Princess Hime, right? They call her Princess?
Yep. Lady Hime. Yeah.
I love this sort of role I'm put in as an audience member of this is like reverent and whimsical and bizarre, but to the context of this world is just taken as a thing that happens. And I think that that's a really, it shows a really bold level of world building to drop the audience in that position and sort of just let them be confused, but in awe of what's unfolding.
Yeah. And that's something that is common amongst all of Ghibli's work, essentially, is that he doesn't feel the need to explain the world. I have not watched the famous Miyazaki Ghibli documentary. I forget the name of it, but my girlfriend has. And as we were walking out of her first viewing and my second earlier this afternoon, she had mentioned to me that, he starts creating these worlds and theorizing and storyboarding without a clear narrative progression in mind. He's just sort of like coming up with these things as his imagination runs wild, and then he puts them together later. And he's not worried about, will the audience member be lost if we just suddenly jump into a different realm or a different level, layer of understanding for our characters. That happens a number of times in The Boy and the Heron, actually, with the scene that we were talking about earlier, that thematically rich scene. That I don't want to say that like conversation that Mahito has with his great granduncle is like only works on that thematic level. Yeah. If you just take it at face value of this father figure or this creator figure telling someone that he like wants him to take over his creation, and that he comes to terms with the fact that there's not going to be someone to take it over, like as much as he wants that, it's just not something that he can force on somebody. It's heartbreaking and beautiful in that moment too. But yeah, we sort of flow in and out of that level of being, to which I kind of like view this film as Alice in Wonderland meets Inception a little bit. Sure. That we're just kind of like in different layers of dreams and states of being throughout this like second half of the film, that are all just, again, beautifully rendered and like sprung forth from the mind of perhaps one of the most imaginative and visually creative filmmakers we ever had.
Yeah, I mean, I
should point out.
The Inception is funny because to take it to the film that is largely credited with giving Nolan the idea for Inception, Satoshi Kon's Paprika, which I also saw for the first time this year.
Yes,
I think that's a really good touchstone to this film in that when you watch Inception, there's a very great pains, partially because it's a massive fucking Hollywood blockbuster, but great pains are taken for most of the runtime to sort of let you know when we're going in and out of dreams and how that happens and so on.
Yeah.
In both Paprika and in The Boy and the Heron, there is a much, I think, more metaphorical and stream of consciousness approach to the storytelling in that we just sort of travel in and out of these modes and like channels of consciousness and place without a ton of regard for really how they work. I mean, one of the most striking images in the film is when that fucking names are now escaping me. Rito, main character.
Which one is that? Oh, Mahito.
Everybody's name is getting confused.
That's okay.
Mahito and Himi, that's where I got stuck, are being chased by the parakeets, and they leave through the door, and they swing the door shut behind them, and they are speeding over this snowy mountainscape.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful image just in the way that it's playing with perspective, and it's playing even with the ways that you interpret this world to be built when this invisible door closes and they're just hanging suspended over this scene. Mm-hmm. It's really quite jarring, and I think that's part of why this film works. You don't really know what turn you're going to take. You're not expected to understand why did we fall through this floor with the heron. Why can these doors swing in and out of different consciousnesses or planes of reality? Because ultimately it doesn't really matter. But I think the issue for me, Tanner, in part because I think you've really clarified for me a lot of the thematic reading of the film. I still, though, have issue with the familial element.
I can understand that, and we need to talk about that. Yeah,
I have trouble with the familial element, and I have a lot of trouble, in particular, with the relationship between the eponymous boy and the eponymous heron. I don't really know what to make of them together.
I would tend to agree with you. I think. And to me, it doesn't necessarily impact my enjoyment or my enamorment, if that's a word, with the film, because at the end of the day, it's just kind of like a really fun character duo dynamic.
Yeah.
That you have this like balding. It's kind of like a storied team up sort of thing. You have the sort of bigger than their britches kind of child, who is very resolute. Is like, I have a goal, and I'm going to achieve that goal no matter what. And then you have the sort of over it, sort of haggard older character who in this just happens to take on the form of probably like a 2.5 foot tall, balding, large nosed man who lives inside of a heron or is a heron.
Yeah.
And who just kind of walks around for a lot of the film, is just walking around on his like skinny bird legs and flapping his wing arms about. And it's really fun. The dynamic is really fun, but the relationship between them is, I think that it is that character dynamic. I'm not sure, potentially what they learn from one another. I think they learn companionship.
Yeah.
That's for certain. Sort of these like very easy to read themes that are common amongst a lot of Ghibli films of companionship, learning selflessness, just stuff like that. I think that there's a lot of that in their relationship.
Yeah, I think where I end up getting a little bit stuck is that I agree with you that it's very compelling on a high level, the relationship they have, seeing the man pop out of the heron.
Yes.
The very, I think, ambiguously antagonistic nature of their relationship as we begin, I think is very compelling. I like watching Mahito make his bow to,
yes, of course,
to try to kill the heron.
All of that is it. Like, that happens in the first 50 minutes of the film, and like that is why I think. Although a couple of people have sort of drawn out I've seen a couple of reviewers, and this film did have some like partially mixed reviews on its initial release as well. Some people have drawn out and sort of singled out Maito and his characterization as a bit, potentially underserved or a bit confused, I think. But that's why I still find him a compelling protagonist nonetheless, is that he is so driven and goal-focused. And that, like, in his goal in, like, finding his mother. Is his mother still alive? He doesn't necessarily buy in all the time, but he's like, well, I need to know. There's a heron talking to me, so
Yeah.
clearly nothing is really impossible. But also, he's like, my dad loves my aunt actually,
Yeah.
and she's my new mom, and she's pregnant, so I have to go rescue her. He has that heroic core, that resolute core to him that makes him compelling to me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, particularly on our way down below. I do like the line when he's talking to old Kiriko on their way in to follow the trap that the heron has set. This notion of, I know it's a trap. I know he's probably lying to me about my mom being alive, but I need to do this. And I think that is compelling, and I can buy into this relationship with Natsuko, his aunt, of, at first, I don't see you as my mother, but I can come to. And I think that by him calling Natsuko his mother by the end as they reunite.
Well, and he gets closure with his real mother, Lady Hemi. He gets closure with her.
Yeah.
The closure that he had not had when he was a young boy.
I think it's effective.
A younger boy.
Yeah, it's effective, and it's very affecting when in the scramble as the world is falling apart, when Hemi says, I don't care that if I go through my door, I'm going to die in the fire because it will be worth it because you are my son. Obviously written in a better way.
Basically, I am proud of you.
Yeah.
The time that we had together was precious, but what has to happen needs to happen.
Yeah, I think that that's effective. Where I end up getting confused is that there's a turn in the relationship between the boy and the heron after the Wara Wara and the pelicans, when when Mahito tricks him and is trying to get information about where Natsuko is, and when they're doing the well and everything. I like that a lot.
Yes,
but then
exactly.
They end up in like this magical forest area, and there's the hole in the beak, and we can't fly until that's fixed.
Right.
I feel like in there's this dialogue which maybe was supposed to be played as a joke, and it just didn't land. But he gets a little.
Oh, where he's gonna ditch him?
Yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't understand what was happening there. I feel like it was never clear the turn in their relationship.
I think it is largely supposed to. It's a setup for the joke of like, haha, I'm gonna leave you. I was actually never your friend. Oh, I need to help me again. Actually,
sure.
If you could just, it's bothering me a little bit. It's a setup for a joke.
That's
I think
fair
entirely. Because I think the real heart of that character and that relationship turn is when Maito is going to bury the noble pelican as he's credited in the film. And I think the heron is very taken aback by that moment. Where he's like, oh, this kid isn't like a mean shit kicker, essentially. Like, he has heart to him, and he's like doing the right thing. He's honorable. He's noble a little bit. I should help him out, actually.
Yeah.
I think that's the character turn, and it's not, I'll be the first to say it's not the most like well explored or like prolonged and like very meticulous character arc and character turn, but I think it's still good. I think it's good nonetheless, and it's that moment serves its purpose in the narrative very well, where you're along with the heron in that moment. He's like, man, like, Maito just saw these pelicans kill all these adorable little Wara Wara in the sky, and he's like, he still deserves a burial. Like, he's not, like, I'm still gonna give him, because at the end of the day, he's a character, as you mentioned already, who's gonna do the right thing. He's gonna do what needs to be done. There's
also this interesting notion in the film that the pelicans, and then the noble pelican says this to Mahito of, we have no choice but to eat the Wara Wara. We've tried flying. We tried flying as high as we can and as long as we can, but we could never get anywhere other than this island.
Yeah, I think that's a common Miyazaki theme too. Like, I think that's kind of a Miyazaki lesson about life, is that like some things just suck. Actually, some things just happen as they need to happen. And there's not really anything you can do about it. Life, like he very much has that like matter of fact attitude about life, where he's like, hey man, some things are just really, really bad and suck a lot of the time. But you can still be noble, and you can still do the right thing when the time comes. And I think that's present in a lot of his films, because a lot of his protagonists do have this like earnestness, this big heart, this selflessness. Sometimes they need to learn it, sometimes it's inherent in them from the beginning, but it's in a lot of his films.
Yeah, and I think it's also particularly important here, this notion that you're describing of like inevitability in a way. Mm-hmm. In our setting of World War II in Japan,
Yes.
and the sort of resource limited life that the mothers or the grandmothers, I forget how they're
The grannies,
how
yeah.
the grannies live, and bartering for cigarettes and everything. Mm-hmm. There is this interesting like cultural context there that I think does support your reading of the parakeets as being in some way fascist, in some way Nazi-esque or adjacent, and that this is a movie in World War II. And I think that, the pelicans being unable to escape their island probably ties into the notion of World War II in some respect. And this is another dimension of the movie that I don't feel like, at least after one viewing, I can really get into. It sort of reminds me of like the environmentalism in Spirited Away, even though that's much more obvious.
Yeah, environmentalism is also a large theme in Miyazaki's work.
Yeah, I just think that they're these really big bucket ideas that The Boy and the Heron falls into. That just in the way that there needed to be decades of scholarship for me to learn about Spirited Away in college class. I'm gonna probably need that for Boy and the Heron, which is not necessarily.
We're gonna take you back to school.
Yeah, take me back to school.
I'm gonna school you.
I think that there's just things like that are not. I don't hold as negatives against the film. They're just points of intrigue that I want to pull on further. I think the only other character moment that really just passed me by, maybe you can explain it to me, is the birthing room, or the delivery room they call it.
Oh yes, I find that a fascinating scene too. And Abram, I'm gonna level with you. I don't know if I can provide an absolute reading for it. I think it's something that it evades me as well, and perhaps it's evidence of an underserved character arc for Natsuko.
I believe that's
his aunt.
That's the aunt's name.
I don't know if I got like the name exactly right, but yeah, his aunt, where she turns on him and gets angry at him.
I didn't get it.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. It's a question mark for me, and it's like you said, Abram. Like every other element of this film seems so intentional and so masterful, coming from a master like Hayao Miyazaki, that I don't immediately view that as like, he messed up there. Like he didn't he dropped the ball on this one thing in particular. However, in doing some listening to an in-depth like sort of background of Hayao Miyazaki, it was brought to my attention that a lot of his compatriots and peers view that he is not the best at writing or creating adult female characters.
Yeah.
So hey, it could have been just a Hayao Miyazaki blind spot in this. But it is ultimately something where I'm like, yeah, that was weird, and I don't necessarily get it. But it's kind of like a drop in the bucket for me, because that scene is still emotionally affecting, as this boy who's like, there she is, the person I came into this crazy world to come rescue, and she's yelling at me that she hates me and she never wants to see me again. What's going on? I'm scared. I'm 11 years old.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you in terms of the sort of the benefit of the doubt element. I also think the point about the female characters is interesting. And again, I'm not very versed in his catalog, but when I watched Porco Rosso earlier this year, just because
Porco Rosso is one that people bring out against him quite a bit in that female lead.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think the idea of a pig falling a plane is funny. I like Star Fox. So I'm like, I want to watch this one. But it does open up this dimension that is worth interrogating in his body of work, which again, I just don't have all the tools to do that for. But what I think I think this does speak to my overarching criticism of Boy and the Heron, in that I do think it feels too full. Again, even just on that, even if it is just a first watch thing, I think that the stuff with the great grand uncle, as we piece it out, I think is challenging to get into, but all the pieces are clearly there to reach an interpretation.
Right.
I think that when you start to bring in the relationship between the boy and the heron, when you start to bring in the relationship with Natsuko, when you start to bring in the relationship that the father has to his social status in the war, and the tower, and the backstory of the tower, and the grannies, I do think it becomes too much in a plot that is this sort of momentum heavy and energetic. I start to feel like a couple steps behind as I watch, and I think that if we could cut a little bit closer to the bone of ultimately, if this film is a reflection on the responsibility of art, this generational impasse, if we could shed some of the baggage around it, I think to me it would have been a stronger and clearer film. Now, maybe I watch it more and I don't feel that way as much, but on my first viewing, I'm like, I just think that there might be too much going on for me to totally receive what's being said.
Yeah. One last thing I'll mention about sort of the research I've done into this film is that, again, harkening back to Miyazaki's age, he apparently brought in more animation head consultants on this film, which is why we might get a scene like the opening like hospital fire that is such a departure from his typical Ghibli house style. Apparently, he brought in people like the other legends of the craft here, like the creative force behind the Evangelion series was a consultant on this, and some other guys that Hayao Miyazaki apparently refers to as the young guys of animation, who are all 60 plus now because he's 80.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that there might be a lot of ideas in that Miyazaki saying this is his last film, but also following that up with, hey, maybe I have more ideas too. We're never really sure. We're never really sure, are we? So I think that this is such a beautiful final film for him, in that The Wind Rises is like all him. That's like, what, again, as he would probably not admit it, but like it's a movie about him and his creative process and his creative view on filmmaking. And this is quite different. This is Miyazaki's view on him passing the baton, the legacy of what he's created, the question mark that is on the horizon for his fame, his legend, and everything that he's worked for, basically his entire life. And it's all done with such empathy and a cool-headedness and a beauty, both in execution of visuals and theme, that I can't help but be swept up in the grandeur of The Boy and the Heron. I still love it. I have a couple things left to say after I give scores, so stick around. But I'm gonna go like a 9.5 on this thing.
I think I'm gonna go a little bit lower. I'm probably gonna land low 8s. Let's. I'm just gonna pull an 8.2 out of my. How about an 8.3? Because that's not a B. That's not a minus anymore.
No, it's not.
You get an 83. You're getting a B on your test. And I want to be clear that this is a score that I think Canon probably would raise on a rewatch. But I'm left wondering if some of my problems with the film and its overstuffed nature and some of the character relationships are problems with needing more viewings to understand them, or marked, clear criticisms that I'm still going to have. But I think ultimately the experience of watching the film is so, as you're saying, grand. It really is remarkable. It's my first time getting to see a Ghibli film in theaters, which was very special by its own right. But I think particularly this one, where the frames are so busy and you feel like sometimes they're making animations more complicated just to show how good at their craft they are. Yeah, like exactly. When we knock a stack of books off of the desk, and in the stack of books is the How Do You Live, but there's like 8 other books in the pile, and all the books are beautifully falling and toppling in pages. Yeah. It is such an incredibly detailed and nuanced piece of animation. The backdrops are so lavish, but you also have this very modest piano score that I feel elevates these scenes.
Yes.
And
the score is just gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
It's very spacious. I think that's sort of how I would describe it. It's modest and spacious, and I think that it almost like cools in some ways this incredible sense of kineticism in the animation, and you end up with this very like partially melancholic and partially invigorating film, just as the actual script does. It's the production and the actual animation quality and score bring you through all these different emotions very effectively, I feel. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
go with a 8 out of 10. I think this is a great film. I do want the last thing I want to talk about, Tanner, before we get out of here, just is where we began, which is the clear financial success of this film.
Yeah, absolutely. This film is projected to. We're recording this on a Sunday night, so actuals are not in, but projected to make 12.8. I think $12.8 million opening weekend in the U.S. here, which would make it the #1 film this weekend. Followed closely, or not too closely, but followed in a second place by Godzilla -1. So 2 Japanese films topping the American box office for the first time ever, which is pretty astounding. 2 amazing films, frankly, that I love and adore. And it's amazing to see that work embraced like this. I'd be interested to see, I don't know if they would release information on this, but the split between subtitled and dubbed versions.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've heard people go back and forth on like, there's more subtitle showings at the theater that I went to, or there's more dubbed showings at the theaters that I went to. Me personally, I think it seems pretty evenly split at our local theater. And as you said, Abram, they pulled a bait and switch on you, thinking that that you would see the dubbed version. But yeah, I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, it's just fucking great to see people embracing this kind of international cinema, even though it is a film by Hayao Miyazaki, probably the most legendary working Japanese director.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because, Tanner, Earwig and the Witch didn't get a theatrical release, right? In the States, at least.
I believe, if memory serves, that was a straight to Max streaming release. Yes.
So the last one would have been The Wind Rises.
In 2013.
Well,
there was some. I forget if the Red Turtle was Ghibli or not. I don't think it was.
Well, the point either way that I think is so interesting about this, and I'll be very curious to just, which I know that is out. I just haven't looked at it yet. Mm-hmm. The age breakdown, the gender breakdown, because anecdotally in my theater, and I will say, by the way, this is only the closest theater I could go to is my one screen indie, like art house cinema. And my multiplex is not playing it. They're too busy playing Angel Studios' The Shift.
Of course.
But the reason I think this is compelling is that this is sort of the moment for people of our generation, Gen Zers, to go see a Ghibli film, not a re-release, because there's always re-release seasons of the older films, but to see a new Ghibli film in theaters, I think is very interesting, just in that these films have, speaking from a very American perspective, sort of taken on such a strong cultural position among people our age. The merchandising is all over the place. Everybody, like us, early 20s, has seen and grew up on these films to some extent or another. And so it is, in some ways, a little bit sad that as Miyazaki is reaching the end of his career, this generation of people who are receiving the work perhaps more strongly than ever are only going to catch maybe 1, maybe 2 more of these.
Yeah, maybe 1 more if we're really lucky.
Yeah.
Especially since this one took, also, Boy and the Heron, apparently the most expensive Japanese film ever made.
Do we know a budget on that? Out of curiosity.
I've tried to find. I don't know.
Sure.
I'd have to do some further research there. But I remember looking a while ago, and it wasn't published yet, which makes sense. But yeah, I mean, it took 7 years to make this one. So even if he gets to work right away, we're still, we're probably looking at a next decade release for the next Studio Ghibli film by Hayao Miyazaki, which I don't want him to rush it, but it is kind of sad that, we only got to experience one new release of one of his films.
Yeah.
What was I going to... Oh, I want to talk about the sub versus the dub here a second, because, it's an ongoing debate that rages on the internet for years and years. I prefer the dub. No, sorry. Scratch that. Stop the cameras. I prefer the subtitled version. Excuse me. Very sorry. This is the first, dubbed thing that I've ever seen beginning to end.
Yeah.
Never seen an episode of an anime dub. Never seen a foreign film of any kind dubbed. But I mean, the subtitle version, it just feels more authentic to me.
Yeah.
Is really the thing. It I'm looking at the characters. I'm like, this is what Hayao Miyazaki intended these characters to sound like and look like speaking. I get it. I got it. And Then I watched the dub version this afternoon. Like I said, first time watching anything like that. It took me a while to get into it, but around the time that we were down the rabbit hole, around that 15-minute mark, I really settled into it, and to I don't know. A lot of people were talking about the English cast, the English speaking cast. So I'll mention them. Robert Pattinson is fucking insane. Like, it's insane that he did that. It goes beyond him giving a great performance, great vocal performance, which he does. And it's just like, you're sharing a cast with Willem Dafoe and Mark Hamill, whose voices are already like that, and you get this guy you get Batman to do that for you, and it's nuts to me. He clearly had a passion for this, and is mimicking the performance of the Japanese voice actor
For the Heron?
Masaki Suda.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, for the Heron, Masaki Suda. But even, I might say, doing more of the blah, 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 blah. Like, watching both, I was like, Robert Pattinson's doing that a lot more in his performance than Suda was. But hey, I digress. He's fucking amazing. Also want to shout out Florence Pugh pulling basically double duty in that English voice cast. And the legend of the game, Mark Hamill, does a great job too.
Who voices Mahito in the English?
It is a new child actor. I don't have
interesting.
their name off the top of my head, but yeah, it is. It is not like it's not like a Stranger Things kid or anything like that. It's not Finn Wolfhard or a Jacob Tremblay or something.
It's not the one everyone hates. What's his name?
Walker Scobell.
No, the fucking Noah Schnapp.
I might have just showed my card. Sorry. Oh, Noah Schnapp. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's the one that everyone hates. Rightfully so. Rightfully so for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
Abram, anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think this has been a really, really good discussion of the film. I feel like I've hit everything I wanted to hit.
Abram, thank you so much for joining me on this review of The Boy and the Heron. Hopefully, we can get to talk about another new Studio Ghibli release, hopefully from Hayao Miyazaki, still in our YouTube lifetimes. But time will tell. We'll be here for all sorts of new movie reviews of the animated and live-action varieties. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.